Olivia Warren had worn the uniform for 12 long years. She had endured deployments that pushed every limit, mental, physical, emotional. She had faced down fears and fought back exhaustion, had held the hands of comrades in their final moments, and written letters to families left behind. But none of that had prepared her for this. Nothing had weighed on her shoulders quite like this. She was bringing her best friend home. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale wasn't supposed to be in that flag-draped casket. He was supposed to be beside her, joking about how he always won their poker nights, debating which greasy diner in San Diego made the best breakfast, or teasing her about how seriously she took life. But War didn't care about promises. War didn't care about plans. One minute they were side by side, pressing through their last mission overseas. The next, he was gone. And when they loaded his body onto the transport plane, Olivia made a promise to his mother, one she would not break. She vowed that Marcus would not come home in the cold custody of strangers through faceless processes. She would be the one to bring him home. No one else. When she stepped into the Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, the air buzzed with the typical chaos of a busy terminal. Flight announcements, suitcase wheels scraping across polished floors, families reuniting, and business travelers glued to their phones. Olivia didn't notice any of it. Her focus was singular, unwavering. Get Marcus back to Marlow, Kansas, where his family was waiting. Shattered but holding on, the military transport had brought them stateside. Now, it was a commercial airline that would carry them the final stretch. Olivia had gone through every official channel. She had the paperwork, the escort clearance, and all the necessary authorizations tucked securely inside the folder in her duffel bag. She had triple-checked everything. Still, her gut churned with unease. She glanced down at her ticket. Departure was in 90 minutes. Plenty of time. With practiced precision, she adjusted the duffel strap over her shoulder and headed toward the gate, her sharp eyes scanning the tarmac through the towering windows. The cargo hold of their plane was open. She searched for Marcus's casket. Nothing yet. That was normal. The escorting process usually ran smoothly. Usually. As Olivia approached the gate counter, the airline employee behind the desk didn't look up, too engrossed in a conversation with a coworker about weekend plans. Olivia stood patiently for a moment. Then two. Then three. Finally, the agent sighed dramatically and turned. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that suggested Olivia was already an inconvenience. "I'm Staff Sergeant Olivia Warren," Olivia said, her voice calm and steady. "I'm escorting Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale to Marlow, Kansas." She handed over her papers. "I need to confirm the procedure once we land." The agent's brows drew together as she scanned the documents, flipping through them with a distracted air. She tapped a few keys on her keyboard and squinted at the screen. Then she sighed again. This time it was different. Heavier. Troubling. "That's actually going to be a problem," the woman said flatly. Olivia's jaw clenched. "What kind of problem?" The agent tapped her nails against the counter. "Your connection through Dallas. Our policy doesn't allow escorts to remain with the remains during transfers at that layover. You'll have to take a separate flight from the casket." The words hit Olivia like a blow to the chest. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. "That's not happening," she said, her tone sharp. The agent gave a half-hearted shrug. "That's the policy." "No," Olivia repeated, her voice turning to steel. "I'm not leaving him alone. I promised his family I'd bring him home." The woman sighed, as if Olivia were being difficult on purpose. "Our policy doesn't allow escorts to stay with remains during transfers at certain airports," she said again. "You'll be on a separate flight to Marlow while the remains continue on the scheduled route." Olivia's grip tightened on her duffel. "Absolutely not. I'm his escort. I stay with him." "I understand, Staff Sergeant Warren," the agent replied mechanically. "But this is how it works." Olivia's mind spun. She'd dealt with bureaucracy before, but this was different. This wasn't about forms or protocols. This was about Marcus. About his family. About a promise. "I need to speak with your supervisor," Olivia said, voice low but firm. The agent rolled her eyes and muttered something into her radio. Olivia stepped back. Her pulse thudded in her ears. This wasn't happening. She had carried Marcus off the battlefield. She had spoken to his mother. She had looked into her hollow eyes and sworn that Marcus would not be alone. Not for a single second. And now an airline policy was threatening to tear that promise apart. "Excuse me, miss." Olivia turned to the voice. An older man stood nearby, rising slowly from his seat. Vietnam veteran, she recognized the insignia on his ball cap immediately. His face was a map of deep lines and scars. His eyes were sharp. "What's the problem here?" he asked. Before Olivia could speak, the gate agent beat her to it. "Sir, this is a private matter," she said, trying to keep control of the situation. The veteran didn't even glance at her. His gaze stayed on Olivia. "You a military escort?" "Yes, sir." "And they won't let you stay with him?" "No, sir." His jaw worked as he clenched his teeth. Then, without another word, he turned to the agent. "That's unacceptable," he said. The agent opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut in. A woman clutched a folded flag in her lap. She had been listening. Olivia had noticed her earlier, sitting quietly, watching. Now she rose slowly, pressing the flag to her chest like it was the only thing holding her up. "My husband died in Afghanistan," the woman said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "And when they brought him home, a soldier stayed with him the entire way. You have no idea what that meant to me. To my kids." Her eyes met the agent's. "You don't separate a fallen soldier from their escort. You just don't." The agent hesitated. Her professional mask faltered, but only briefly. By now, others had begun to listen. Heads turned. Voices murmured. "She's military," someone said. "Why aren't they letting her do her job?" "That's disgusting," another muttered. A tall man in a business suit stood up next. "I fly every week," he said. "I've seen airlines roll out the red carpet for celebrities. You're telling me you can't make an exception for this?" "This is company policy," the agent stammered. "This is a soldier bringing another soldier home," the veteran said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "That means something." Scattered applause broke out. Nods of agreement rippled through the gate area. The agent shifted uncomfortably and picked up her radio again, mumbling something Olivia couldn't make out. Then, a voice crackled over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. Could Staff Sergeant Warren please come to the podium?" The crowd fell silent. Olivia's stomach clenched. She stepped forward, her boots echoing against the tile floor. The gate agent stepped aside. A tall man emerged from the jet bridge, still wearing his pilot's uniform. His silver hair was neatly combed, his insignia polished. But it wasn't his appearance that struck Olivia. It was the understanding in his eyes. "Sergeant Warren," he greeted, extending his hand. "Captain," she answered, shaking it. "I heard everything," he said simply. Then, turning to the gate agent, he continued, "This soldier is staying with her comrade." The agent opened her mouth. "Captain," I explained. "I know what you explained," he interrupted. "And I also know we've made exceptions before. I just spoke with corporate. We're making one now." The agent's face reddened. She shifted, then nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir. You have my full authority," the captain said. Then he turned to Olivia. "You'll stay with him. Every step of the way." Olivia's throat tightened. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once. "Just doing what's right." The captain disappeared back into the jet bridge. The agent reluctantly returned Olivia's paperwork. "You're all set," she said quietly. Olivia took the papers without a word. But she noticed the look the agent gave her, resentment, frustration. This wasn't over. And sure enough, it wasn't. "Your seat's been reassigned," the agent said. "You're now in the last row." Olivia stared at her. "What do you mean reassigned?" "I was in 14C. "It's policy," the agent said. Another quiet tactic. Another way to make it harder. But Olivia didn't have time to fight. "Not now." "Fine," she said. As she reached for the boarding pass, the businessman from earlier stepped forward. "No, it's not," he said. He handed his ticket to the agent. "She can have my seat. First class. 3A. Olivia blinked. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. "Take it." The agent scanned his ticket, her jaw tight. "Done." The businessman put a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "You get him home." She nodded. "I will." As Olivia boarded, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her. This wasn't just for Marcus. It was for every soldier who had been carried home by someone who cared. As she reached her seat, she saw the pilot standing at the front of the cabin. He waited until everyone was seated before he spoke into the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we take off, I want to recognize someone." He gestured to Olivia. "Staff Sergeant Warren is escorting Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale home. She made a promise to his family that she'd see him all the way there. And she's keeping that promise." A hush fell. Then, slowly, people began to clap. The Vietnam veteran stood first. The widow followed, tears in her eyes. The applause grew louder, spreading throughout the cabin. Olivia sat still, overwhelmed. The pilot gave her a small nod before returning to the cockpit. Later, a flight attendant knelt beside her. "The captain wanted you to have these," she said softly, holding out a pair of pilot wings on a small tray. Olivia took them with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. As the plane touched down in Marlow hours later, Olivia saw Marcus's family waiting beyond security. His mother stood tall, clutching a tissue in one hand. Olivia squared her shoulders. She had made a promise, and now she had kept it,